Sigara. German Buyavatilia, Samlutan and Beva Machenasa. Tarbatoni Shime Geshe, Dumedile Tarbe, Tandu, Tarban Devin Devachig Mardo. Tarbatoni Shime Geshe. What did you call? Nuevo condition eco Delia, Yaguris Tonane, the Tom de Chigra. The Venjune de Sosoko Gurichi Tone, Tom de Chigra. Tadi Yagumedu some Tunge the Candy Yagu Samutana, Teletrena Sabe, Trendi Lochene, Teletardi Lochigra, or this Oda. Tunge de Basanangaraza, Qua, Kumbu, the Sukangara, Jitenji Neta, Luda, Lonsu Kanga Tunge de Bare, Qua Soda, Qua Benete Sake, Nenzambuli Kora Sato Dote. And they lose the Garazu Simjin Sobura de Yora. They do know it and to lose the Yora. They don't get them bara. No lose. And the longer, Saya Toya Koyala Sobata Kanga, don't get them down the order. So don't get them bars. Ya Koras, some sort of Koras. Led and remember one get you watching the chick to duty, but some sort of Korasigora. Tanda day or a Tatane outside. Ya don't do Rosil part some chasora. Ya don't do the patch in ya, you don't which part some chas, tell a chorus, chili, chorus. Oh, don't get them bars. Then don't have a wet and bows of Gua. Dennis and Arazo Tonde, Musum the Tonde, Neta, Luda Longula Soba, the Zukanga, Marazu with the Venjung, which is Samlatan, the Shenja Shuchibuchi, the Venjung Marese. Yungone Samlutan Shenge Pawatsu Samlutande, the Tungegi, Shichin Kesere, Sungora, Chaksha Shuchibuche, Mare Sungora. Dinetunga Pawet and Bows. Dinekunjum Pawet and Bows, and the Duka Resna, Tunga Kanga Josaka Jude, did the Esche, Nyamo than Yamo and the Sabe Let Sungora, Kunjus Netera, Led on Yamonia Kunjum Setua. Nyamosina Dang Tado Ziba, and it Chava, Condo, Lage, Trado, Drensimless over Tesu Yamorua. Tinde Wangi any course of the less of us. Less do connect Geshe to less of your, some Samultan to less of your, Luigi Chevachi to less of your, Gulon Kevachi Samultan to the lake was of your, Tiwangi Luigi Chevachi to the Kevele, Gane Kishi Kevele. Kulung embassy Samlutan, and a teleton Luda Magalen, make you a ladura. Kulung Kewada, Tibake member, Shell Pemba, don't never came member. You know, no longer thank less. Kewa Mange, make you my less. Or Tangi Mabushekesa. That on the Tambu second Tambu, the Tandashan to do. To the Nime Samla Mambenase. Razu Nelu Longula Soba, to make them but the Gandhi. The Tungegi Shichi, but the Yabuji Samlutan Bezu Machena Sugora. And then Teletarve Tardu Loti Chigmares. They Jukunjurva, they Jukunjupang Becone, Teletardu Loti Chigmares Sugoda, Hotilam Diria.
So then to begin with, from the abbreviated Lamrim by J. Lama Tsongkhapa, he begins by speaking about the truth of suffering. So it reads here, if you make no effort to ponder the faults of suffering, of true suffering, a genuine wish for liberation will not arise. So here, when the Buddha was giving the first turning of the wheel, he taught the Four Noble Truths, beginning with the truth of suffering. And we first have to examine what are the defects, what are the faults, what is the nature of this suffering, in order to give rise to a wish to be freed from that. As long as we don't see this as suffering or understand the faults or the defects of our current situation, then the wish to be freed won't arise. So long as we see these things as being the source of our pleasure, our happiness, then we won't give rise to a wish to be freed from this. So true sufferings refers refers to that which is within samsara, our aggregates, this body that we have, the place that we abide in, our abode. Each sentient being has this body, this set of aggregates that is the basis of their experience of suffering, and that is within true sufferings, as well as the kinds of things that we enjoy, our abode. All of this is within samsara. So everything that is driven by karma and the afflictions, particularly this cycle of continuing to take rebirth, to continuing to connect to another rebirth without control due to the force of our karma and afflictions, like going from being a human to an animal to a god and so forth. All of that is contained within the truth of suffering. As the Buddha said, this is the noble truth of suffering. So all that we normally identify, usually we see these things as the source of our pleasure, the source of our happiness, like our body and our abode and our various enjoyments, the possessions that we have. But really, these are not things that we should be attached to or craving, because they're in the nature of suffering. And so too, then it continues to, the Buddha taught that this is the origin of suffering. So he taught the second noble truth, referring to karma and the afflictions, specifically the kind of affliction of grasping at a self, and all of the various afflictions that arise from that, our attachment and hatred and competitiveness and jealousy and so forth, that then drive our various actions of speech and mind. So we can have a particular intention and then we say words, and that is how we create actions, we create karmas. Or we have a particular intention and we carry that out with our body. Even that very intention is a karma that we are creating, whether it is virtuous or non-virtuous, or a neutral one that is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So here, if we don't make an effort to contemplate the nature, the suffering nature of all of these things, our abode, our enjoyments, our body, then we're not able to really genuinely give rise to this wish for liberation, the wish to be freed from them. So Je Lama Tsongkhapa begins in this verse by emphasizing the importance of recognizing the defects of samsara, seeing this as in the nature of suffering, in order to give rise to the kind of desire to be freed from that. So if we don't think about that, we're not going to have that sense of wanting to get out of this. So this is the first of the four noble truths. We have to think about suffering and the nature of our suffering in order to want to be freed from it.
Những cái khổ thánh đế là những cái hiểm họa, là cái gốc của khổ đau. Mà cái gốc khổ đau đó chính là phiền não và những cái nghiệp là chấp ngã, cái lòng kiêu ngạo, ghen tị, cái sân hận và cái sự tham đắm. Tất cả đó nó sinh khởi là cái nguyên nhân để dẫn tới cái vòng sinh tử luân hồi. Cho nên khi chúng ta miệng nói là thân hành động và cái suy nghĩ đều là tạo nghiệp, nên những cái loại phiền não là chấp ngã, kiêu ngạo, ghen tị, tham sân, đó là phiền não, và nó tác động, nó làm cho chúng ta tạo nghiệp, tạo tác hành động. Giống như cái miệng với cái động cơ tốt, miệng chúng ta nói, hay là thân chúng ta hành động, hay là chúng ta suy nghĩ với động cơ tốt, thì tất cả nó trở thành là cái nghiệp thiện. Nhưng với cái động cơ xấu, chúng ta miệng nói, thân hành động và cái trong tư duy, thì tất cả trở thành là nghiệp bất thiện. Ở cái trạng thái trung tính, chúng ta không có cái động cơ xấu, cũng không có động cơ tốt, thì chúng ta có thể là nói năng, hay là hành động, hay suy nghĩ, nó trở thành là những cái nghiệp trung tính. Nếu như chúng ta không nỗ lực để suy nghĩ, đi tìm những cái nguyên nhân nào để dẫn chúng ta trong sinh tử luân hồi, không thấy cái bản chất khổ đau là nguy hiểm, là hiểm họa, thì cái tâm giải thoát chân thật sẽ không bao giờ sinh khởi. Cho nên cái điều quan trọng nhất là chúng ta phải nhận diện được cái bản chất khổ đau của trong sinh tử luân hồi, và nó là lỗi lầm, nó là tai họa. Cho nên cái tâm cầu giải thoát mới thực sự phát sinh.
Tôi thì nhìn mình xem là mang bên là chế rồi. Thảo thì nhớ sẽ tôi tung hele thảo sẽ gọi tung hele thảo sẽ lẽ đang nhớ một bé hoàng cái phun bún đồ lên chế gọi cái lẽ thảo sẽ gọi khoa lẽ thảo đó lẽ đang nhớ một bé sáng tôi cho này cho chiếc lạng nhà đi xài nhà hiện tại chỉ tham gia cho chiếc lạng đó rồi mà bà cái chiếc này chiếc tôi chưa đi khoa đó là khoa sẽ gọi cái lẽ thảo gọi đó thảo ba sẽ Nyamu Mudetan Gasser. Dungeni Sang Mambena, Tarba Tony Chishimi Geshe. Tarba said Dungele Tarba. Dungi Karle Taba Dungi Mambu Yodo. Nesong Dungele Tarba Yoda, Koya Dungele Tarba Yode. Tatanda Kamdilia, Koya Dungele Tarba City. The Angesong Dungele Tava Yamdo Yurto. Tele Tarbe Tarbas. Koya Dungele Tarbe Tarba. No. Koya Dungi Karkaras, Nesong Dunga Yode. Melekega Nachi Dunga Yode, Hala Dunga Yode. Samayila Dunga Yode, Sama Dunga Yora. That Dunga Zode. Gekanachi Rala Rama Meba. Geshe Chikovita Tunga Zorchira. Oh, yeah. Today, Nimisang Mambena, Tarva Tony Chishimekis. Tungele Tarna, Sangazukoya, Tungele Tarna, Samsagi, Ning Takwane Shushimishi Kigmadua, Timegia Karesana, Kendi Yakucha Haku Yomara, Kyola Yundendu Tate Yora, Divi Samgora, Midaba, Tamang Dogmata. Tunge Dero, Tunge Dembate, and Nejumone the Kare Midabare Devare. Neda Luda Longula Soba Sosu, Ya Langzutan Jorbata, Rava, Langzutan Jorbata, and the Karsoda, Soda, Nemebata, Langzutan Jorbata, Sola Soba Sida. The Sukanga Midabare Teoto, Narazuta Wanzingore. Nemeba, Tanda Tandashi Tete, those Chetes of the Samlokoda. Tabas Tagi Tanda, Tondo Tanda, Sanya Tanda, Tegri Samsa, Samsitua, Attindi Arsoda. Tungyawa, Karsur. Mitapa, Tapan Zimbasitua. Takwa Yi, Samsa Tindi, Samgiom, the Samlunalia. Nema Yavis the Tanda, Sanya Tangan Yisam, Tindi Samsitua. What till a Tangzis or a Jigdebet down Tangzisitira. That Tangzi Tramus, Kiji Luka. You are my sister, Trump made about Tramasud, Keji in your chapter Sigara. Oh, dear. And that is Kanga de Shangi Saltangendici, some code on a Jidam is some law, Teletongs the Sigua, Rabarichero, Langzo in a Tagateris, Tanda Shambana Shabateris, make and go to Tactic and go there, some society members of the Tunguda. Or thing as you saw the Yagali on this. Early messenger Mishisuna, Pumbudi, Shogun up on the kid, Shida Tonju Marwa, Shida Toya Yomara, Shogun up when the kidura. The Yagali didn't make one kid dog, make Yavi kids. In the Tambudo assembly, make it do some rich course. This is Chamado and Dabaris kid, Sado kid nation, some quarter chicken. Cake in the Hamid, Sanga Jaggy doing the Pony Pumbu cake, James and the real Kaja. This was a drug cake, me could have done with the Tambudo hard leisure to teach you. This horrors to do what is so literally. Rasuda. Name about the Tangzi or a Tagana de Sorichora. Miss Naguduna corner your session with Sosa, Tangzi is one Janet, so attended her some the summer corgora. Take a cool meadow. That's what. Tangzi Sitesara. Lanzo in a Lanzos. The name about that Losha Battles or Lanzosana, than the Losha Juchit, Tangzirichara. Can go chai maybe some Hoda. Lanzo and Jorwas a pension richiness. Name about that doesn't never. Name about the Juni never chagra. Lanzo the Juni can go chagra. Jorwa the Jorwa Karina Chema Kangachi, Mevche Dogoda. Young Lanzo than Jorwada. Sauce. So, Tando Sambuch and leaders in the Kama vegetation with the sauce. Diako Keji in Joachi, you are the Chimako Kagachi Drosherdo. Oh, this and Medawa. Oh, didn't some look at Mezan and to dish like jerky, some Koyo Marto. The Madrid was a teach sooner.
So here, as it says, as Jela Monsongkhapa says, if you make no effort to ponder the faults of true suffering, a genuine wish for liberation will not arise. So here, when we're talking about a wish for liberation, this is kind of a freedom from the sort of suffering of samsara, in particular, the kind of suffering of continued rebirth, of continuing to cast off and take up various aggregates due to the force of our karma and afflictions. So repeatedly taking rebirth in this kind of cycle, that's what we refer to as samsara or cyclic existence. And there are various types of freedom one could wish for. You can look at the sufferings of the lower realms and wish to be free from those. Here we're talking about the sufferings of samsara, and there are many different levels of suffering within samsara. We can look at the sufferings of the lower realms, but also the sufferings of humans, of experiencing birth, aging, sickness, and death, and the sufferings that even gods experience. So every being within samsara is subject to the kind of suffering of repeatedly being forced to, without any kind of autonomy or independence, take rebirth due to karma and the afflictions, be subject to dying and having to be reborn, and age and get sick and so forth. And so here, this kind of attitude of really reflecting on the nature of samsara is what allows us to give rise to a genuine sense of wanting to be liberated from that, wanting to be free from that. But most of us don't have this kind of genuine, real wish to be freed from samsara because we don't really contemplate the nature of samsara. We don't think about true sufferings. So first, we have this kind of perception of we hold things that are in their nature impermanent as being permanent. The kind of things that we have, like our wealth or our youth, our life, we have this sense that like, oh, these will remain forever, our good health and so forth. That it's like, well, they were here today, you know, that thing was there yesterday, it's here today, it will be there tomorrow. We have this sense that things will remain and stay as they are. Like we think about our youth like that, like, oh yeah, I'm going to remain youthful, I'm not going to age. Or if we're in a state where we have health, we hold that as something that's not going to change. And so here we don't even have a kind of understanding of coarse impermanence, let alone the kind of subtle impermanence of everything being momentary, not even remaining for a moment. But we don't even really have a sense of the fact that the things that we grasp as being permanent, as thinking like, oh, well, that same thing was here yesterday, it's here today, it will be here tomorrow. We are we grasp at things as remaining forever, like they will be around. Like we know that we have to die, but we don't really like connect with that actual fact. For example, in Tibet, they used to sort of take the bodies sort of quietly out of the house in the morning. You didn't often see corpses. But when you go to India, it's a common sight to see in the middle of the day people carrying around a corpse. And at first there's a kind of shock at like, wow, there's a body in the streets. That's someone that has died. But eventually when you see that enough, you just start to look at it as like someone carrying rocks or stones. Like it doesn't even occur that it's an actual body of someone that has died. So we hold to this. We really hold like our youth will remain, our health will remain, our possessions will remain. We don't recognize that they are all impermanent. And so contemplating impermanence means looking at the fact that whatever sort of youth we have is going to degenerate. Whatever kind of health we might have, we're eventually going to have to get sick. Whatever wealth or possessions we have accumulated, there's one day going to go away. And so too with our very life force. So although we hold these things as permanent, we are mistaken in this way. We don't actually see their sort of suffering nature or their impermanence because we are so caught up in our view of them as remaining for a long time. So again, if we don't really think about the faults of true suffering, the defects of the kind of situation that we are in, particularly with respect to samsara, then we can't have this genuine wish for liberation.
지 삼마다나 원에 다르거든 이제 내성 그 동엘에 다르로 쩌마 많이 뭐 쇼침부 지금 말아 말아서 하고도 원에 전에 녀와이다 전주도 동에 삼고라 다 녀와다 연나면나 간시다 연나면나 간시거라 이것이다 전주도 통해도가 전주 동에도가 세 또에 강가 메다다 강가체 동에도가 전주 동에도 통해도가 그래서 그 공부를 두습니다. 전주다냐 따와샤스 삼성 전주도에서 때문에서 아주 때문다가 누라 전주다산도 심지어서 때문에 되지 않는데 나와지요 말아. 따와샤스 건주동에 간데도 그래서 따슨 거라. 말아서 껴와라는 진짜 마음 영사를 삼 마음발은 용기 마음 대어서 내 마음 대어서 삼을 거네. 근데 때는 있어서 소에 레버치 속여라. 근데 단녀와 이다 도스도 단도 토야게 요 말데 그래서 그 매는 산지게 고고다는 송구 말을 송구했던다 요 말고 순송구했던다 요 말고 소소던다지 주에 연안에 교수 시험 고고다 지금 봐도 어찌되고 나중에 예송구 동에도 삼구라 기부청은 처음에다 봐대 삼으로와 당지 말에서 시사는 가와가와 기도했는데 텐데 요 말에서 녀원을 깨서나 네 동에 가려서 뭐 뒤 동에 랑근 용거리 삼제 라한테 뭐 주네 나중에 하검선에 따지 하다 그래서 꼬매도 까불지 kumira 다소서 냐와기 기다기 단루라실게 미세 똑지에도 검선에 공으로 지금 알아 때문에 저는 공고야라 나디들 깨는 애들 용거리 삼자를 또 통만 먹는 장매의 깨사를 양사를 단단히 마무대요래 칠들에 사고요래 드레 냥고그레 삼자래 소아들 랩고도 소소 돌려 얘는 원에 되게는 야고면도 삼닝 타번에 단도 삼을 슈쳐버지라 냐와다 도서 통해면에 뒤에 찬저에 동에 가서 매일 통해요라 찬저와 예소라 메다탄이 신경도 매야 신의 소복한 메다탄도 지tom니 생겨도 퍼세지는 생겨도 칸이 시계도 또니 시계도 지스가 그 찬라분라분들 메인직내라 요아래서 거라 다진데 망보여서 그 지대 감진데 요아래서 거라 어디 인도 가서라 소소 대다대 교회 매바시 안에 동해된 연구를 해서 통만 매바는 양대 장매가 양사를 다다른 메르시 톱체 야구종을 국가 야구종을 삼자니 소소 밀리터에 짜침부를 시비서 거라 당대진들 멤버신들이 깨버려서 내 땡주는 예버신도 가서나 원에 예가와래 삼자 삼을 거야요라 어디인데 예수 그 동에도 삼고라 냐와야 산예 그 동에서 장예 그 동에서로 어디네 사회 멤버로 사시간가 멤버 때 되나 소설류간가 멤버 안에 들으셔야 단다 시에서 요 말이야 냥고요라고 얘기하고 이 장년이나 그 가는 신이지 장무차자게 소부도 밖에도 단다 셈매 매차지 동행이 된 게 소소 류도 ቻ는 봐 동부만 못 차도 빼면은 시밖에도 어떤데 망부요라냐냐 아니 진행나래 그 kum대지지 세를 또 양제 양견도 야야서 양견은 야서 야야서 야자르자르 시치 세리지 근데 이거다 어쩌네 대저 삼고야래 배절랑비즈나 요라 소소 삼로 다나 대문에 마진 야고래 삼녀선을 동에를 타지도 타고요 삼 하다미 깨와지 타고요 삼 에네다 녀선을 깨지 교가래서 어다 메교와 주대래도 하셔를 써대 딩에 사메 삼교 말에 깨와들이 시다 사면에 깨와가 장매분에 사대요라 오 당에서 깨지 교세메버 사요래 상이마 다트도 샤바체고래서 내가 제일 개발시 진짜 domsen체 대수 연구와도 어디요 그 대중간도 삼을 땅고요라 뭐 가서래 그래서 다단디셔서 동대님이 삼라 만배나서 동대님이 삼고라 민지 된게 동해대님이 삼고를 깨가 나실려서 봐라 전에 이다다 저러다 상막에 동해 삼고로도 예son 그 동해 삼네 예son 그 동해에 탄득기 그래 탄득기에서는 예son 계제 육아래 시알라 차와들에 Right? And then the Kusum Sobo to the Judicare, shall it saw pa, Pemba Trubatere, or Tinity Judiling Tawan and Begredo. Nimmer Messenalio, or Tingatri to be some net getting Nimas Milletsaw Maje, Pemba Truere Choso, Tatri, I would choose some sources of call, commit the Kangayan wood. So the man and Shadaka Yoma, that tell some penny day order me. Ten or the team, but did the Shaja Yang and Dushijana, the Yoma, so the sword and young water. Yeah, that is.
So here, the kind of explanation of the defect of samsara and the defect of the lower realms. Sometimes there are those, sometimes like Western audiences who think, who sort of feel turned off by talking about those types of topics. They think like, oh, well, Dharma is about making us happy, about achieving happiness. So why are you explaining these kinds of things that are just all about suffering? But here, really, again, to give rise to this kind of uncontrived, unfabricated sort of wish to be free from that, we have to actually contemplate what that suffering is in order to generate that sort of real, genuine desire to be out of that, to be freed from it. So, whether or not we can sort of speculate, are there hell beings? Are there hungry ghosts? These are things that we can't actually see, but we can see animals. We can see the kind of sufferings that they experience. Actually, the master Nagarjuna said we should look at animals, not in the sense of like watching a movie or watching some sort of picture, but rather to imagine what it would be like to experience the kind of suffering that they have to go through, and really relate it to actually having to experience that, not as just like something else that's over there. So, although we can't see the beings that are in like the hungry ghost realm or the hell beings, although we might have doubt, there's no reason for the Buddha to lie to us about them or to say something that is deceptive in any way. It's really about a genuine developing this kind of genuine wish to be freed from those states that the Buddha is explaining this, not with any sort of wish to make us depressed or to lie to us in some sort of way. So, by contemplating the sufferings of the lower realms and by thinking about death and impermanence, we recognize that these are the types of sufferings that we ourselves could have to experience. Now, the majority of us, we don't like contemplating true sufferings. We don't like thinking about the sufferings of samsara or the sufferings of the lower realms. Perhaps we'd rather do something like deity yoga. That seems very comfortable and happy to like imagine ourselves as a deity or whatever. But this is the kind of practice that is really crucial to actually impel us to make a kind of genuine practice. So we have to recognize that we have been taking rebirth since beginningless time. We have actually experienced countless different rebirths and thus have experienced some of these sufferings. But we also have to see in relation to ourselves that these are potential kinds of things that we could suffer ourselves if we accumulate the kind of causes that would lead to that type of suffering. So again, how can we want to avoid these things or be freed from them unless we have actually thought about them? So we can see even in the human realm the kinds of fates that human beings have to meet. They're burned alive, or they freeze to death, or starve. We can think about this in a sense of like the sort of life that we could potentially take, and the life that we have right now is something that is extremely valuable. The kind of rebirth that we have taken as a human with all of these opportunities, we come to really feel is rare and valuable and precious. If we contemplate, say, being, imagine having to be burned to death in a hell or in a cold hell where we would be frozen to the point where we like split apart like a lotus, or there are descriptions of those kinds of hells that are called like the reviving hells, where you're killed only to be sort of revived and go through that kind of intense suffering again. And so we have to think what that would be like to experience something like that in order to really want to avoid it. And then we contemplate, well, what are the causes that lead to such rebirths? And it's those sorts of actions that cause harm to others, those non-virtuous actions. And we have in the past accumulated countless kinds of non-virtues. And thus we need to make an effort at generating that kind of regret and resolve, engaging in the four opponent powers in order to purify. And so it is then by contemplating the sort of true sufferings that we make an effort at avoiding the causes. causes. Whether we are even born as a human and experience the sufferings of samsara, or are born in the lower realms, the sort of causes that lead to those are harm toward others. The kinds of sufferings that we experience come from that. And then we need to contemplate, what are the causes that lead to a good rebirth? What are the kinds of things that I can do in order to ensure a positive sort of situation in the future? And so to generate this really sense from the depths of our heart, we have to contemplate this suffering in relation to ourselves. Like, it can't just be stuff that we hear. We hear about these various types of suffering and just sort of like it's knowledge that we are accumulating or a story that we're hearing. We have to actually generate a feeling. Like, what would it be like if I had to experience that? And that is the kind of level of genuine feeling that is necessary to really inspire our practice. As these lines of this verse say, if you make no effort to ponder the faults of true suffering, a genuine wish for liberation will not arise. So here it's essential that even if it seems like something unpleasant, we take the time to really think about suffering in order to make that kind of effort at the causes that will avoid it for ourselves in the future.
Chúng ta đã làm 10 điều bất thiện. Còn làm thế nào để thoát khỏi những cảnh giới khổ đó thì chúng ta phải tu tập 10 cái thập thiện để sinh vào cõi trời và cõi người. Cho nên hiện tại thì mình có được cái thân người, mình không có làm những cái ác nghiệp để mà sinh vào những cõi thấp. Nhưng mà ở trong đời quá khứ, trong vô thị kiếp tới giờ, mình đã tạo rất nhiều nhân để sinh vào địa ngục, ngạ quỷ súc sinh. Cho nên khi mà trong Lâm Rim là thứ tự con đường đi đến giác ngộ, để giải thích rất là rõ, để khi chúng ta quan sát về những cảnh giới khổ đau, để chúng ta cảm nghiệm thực sự cái khổ đau chúng sinh đang trải qua và mình đã từng trải qua và sẽ trải qua, thì cái tâm cầu giải thoát đó nó sẽ phát sinh một cách mãnh liệt. Cho nên làm thế nào để chúng ta ngăn chặn những cái khổ đau ở trong ác đạo đó? Cho nên thì chúng ta phải thực hành 10 điều thiện. Và những cái nguyên nhân mà sinh vào ác đạo đó là do tổn hại chúng sinh. Cho nên chúng ta phải sinh ra già, bệnh chết, sinh ra ở trong loài ngạ quỷ, sinh ra những khổ đau của cảnh giới thấp. Rồi khi suy nghĩ như vậy thì chúng ta mới nỗ lực từng ngày từng giờ để không tổn hại chúng sinh và làm lợi ích chúng sinh, và là những nguyên nhân để chúng ta sinh vào cái cõi lành. Nếu như chúng ta không suy nghĩ như vậy thì chúng ta sẽ không có cảm giác, dù mình có thực hành cái gì đi nữa, nhưng mà cái tâm cầu giải thoát thực sự nó không có phát sinh. Mình không có cảm xúc được những cái khổ đau thì cái tâm cầu giải thoát thì không bao giờ phát sinh. Cho nên khi mà chúng ta ngồi mà lắng nghe thì chúng ta sẽ có công đức của cái việc nghe, nhưng chúng ta không cảm nghiệm, không thực hành thì chúng ta sẽ không bao giờ có tâm cầu giải thoát. Cho nên cái điều quan trọng là chúng ta nghe và phải quan sát để làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể thể nghiệm và cái thấy khổ đau thực sự, và cái tâm cầu giải thoát nó mới sinh khởi.
Ta tanda ko kasura. Tunge wa samde ta ko da china tunge wa samde tambo mida wa de samgdo wa. Sanje chumden de chuson de temba shison tika ne jiten ji ne le longju la so ba. Ya ne me ba ta longju dan jorwa la so ba che ba che de chama so ga ra. Mida ba re son de wa te zu kan ga ju ne me ba de na za na ye le ke ji ju ji de ra min ne ba che ne so de de cha re de wa. Nebe chol tanda namena ko nebe chol fa ju denge chi re de ra nebe dan ro mo ge chi re de ra tanda shig mena chingi chi be ne ti chol so be tanda yena ti chol ro de yo ra lang zu ro chi ne tanda so ken go cha yo mar de so ken go cha le nyer ge ji chi ko chi li te ma ra cho zu de ma so ro de yo ra jo lang zu da jor ba da so de chi na ko zu so tanda de che yo mar de keji so che de nyer ru yo ra tende samul da ne tungene tungere chi re de do mida wa re sti sama mida wa re da se de kisum sa ba ko e pinzo sama tamje yu ne tungere ran shil pa ju re de do te samul da ne sem le kyo re chi er chi ora ti tungere samul da na yende ka re se ne she tungere yende ne kyo e che ba se war che ne so nga je chen bu da tende di chang jang to ne Tende Yungu Omare, Semba Chona Dochi, Rawakati in the Tende Chungora, Joy Tabasa, Naja Chambuche, the Kondu Chambuche, the Tuzun do Yare. Koabala Ninji, Shenda Kanga, Nagan, the Sanga, the Chitan, the Mamutondera, the Zukanga, Ninji, Soso attended Rea Yin Sam Sangipa, Soa Tidu Nyamyung, Soa Chigira. And then the consequences of Cochichation, Ninja Sagaje, Soso the Kaki Meros of the Sangudua. Some quantity saw the Lekugara, or Ninja Soso attended Samsung. Medagua Samutandi, Tungi Samus Kogoda. And it Tunga in the Shaya, Sergeant Yelling Soso Sobutabude, Tunga in the Tata Neve Soji Dangerous. Keba, Nawa, Chiva, Saya, Tunga, Koya, Lubulu, Koyamamuyara. There's a dream addition to make a Yogoda. Maya Saya Kagachi Tazuchi Madin Tunga Yangoda. She's a connect to make Shiri Samutana Redator. Tata Neve Sojite, Tunga Shidichi, Soso Sobute de Ara. Anyway, did you learn you Shamaja, Soso Ramaji take him a door. Joangame led a Yamuba Kaziba to Paya, Karachi, do you want to dry it tomato, Soso Ramachi take him a door. La Cotende Samutana, Jona Young Tunga. Tunga said any query with a solid door. Oh, this sometime we are. Share Tunga, and then the Johet was a Coabal and Nishiki. Kela Kanshi, Tilla the station, and Yerin a Tola Machike, Kiwatu that it was Paya Tatilia, solid Kiore. Oh, till Canale. And it Kiwal of Church do there. Tikwapaya to love Church do there. Champagne some Church do Yora. Oh, this sometime we resume the teach you.
So here, when we contemplate suffering, again, thinking about first the fact of impermanence, all of the things that we have, like our state of health, even our youth, all of our possessions and wealth, this very abode, all of these things are impermanent. They don't remain. Like right now, we are not sick, but we are constantly changing moment to moment to moment. We are moving toward that time when we will be sick. Or right now, we are still alive, but we're not for a moment remaining. We are getting closer and closer to death. The life force that we have will be cut off. We're not moving farther away from that, but rather closer to it. Our youth or our possessions that we value are things, again, which are all impermanent. They're in this nature of suffering. So here, when we think about this, when we contemplate the kind of nature of all of these phenomena, we give rise to a sense of sort of revulsion or of wanting renunciation, of wanting to get out of that. And so here, when we think about suffering, there's a verse which describes that there are benefits to contemplating suffering, including that it gets rid of our arrogance or our pride. We are less prideful or arrogant when we know that we experience suffering. We recognize this as our situation. It also helps us to develop compassion for other sentient beings. It's not like we're sort of viewing them over there, but rather recognizing our own suffering experience and connected with that experience, the feeling that we have toward ourselves. We see that others suffer. And so in this way, it can help us to generate compassion for other sentient beings. So here, again, that's related to our own sort of feelings and experience. And so too, this kind of thinking about suffering helps us to generate this sort of attitude of renunciation. These contaminated aggregates that we have, we've taken up these aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions. And there are so many things that we need in order to sustain and support these aggregates. We have to have food, and we have to have water and clothing and shelter. And if we lack any of those things, this immediately becomes a basis of suffering. So when we really think about it, these kinds of aggregates that we have are in the nature of suffering. We are constantly having to take care of them in order not to suffer. And so again, that we can think about this kind of suffering nature, and that we are not in a state of freedom. We have to follow after the kind of karma that we have created due to our afflictions. We have to take rebirth wherever it may be due to the force of that. And so when we have a kind of feeling about that, again, not only does it reduce our arrogance or pride and help us generate compassion compassion for others, but it also leads to a natural sort of avoidance of non-virtue. We will be more likely to avoid the kind of causes of suffering and a natural engagement in virtue. We will accumulate more virtue in a more powerful way when we have really thought about the suffering nature and the kind of causes of suffering. So here, the sort of contemplation of the nature of true suffering, in particular by thinking about impermanence and those other faculties, helps us generate these qualities.
sem pungbunga yora pungbunga bodo tende medabada dongewada tende juro chenji ba samlia bochi kona ani tinalia ranga singe se takbachi yongshin ya yomara kechi juro chengi kyanja re de do tele ranga chi da takbachi da ranga chi koranchi bu ne tumge shantalia pungbunga le techin jelni juachi meguge tende che yomara 우리들이 다음에 봤어야 될 거 같아 연구하라. 미다바야 불러 삼르타. 동해와 삼르타 통나. 아니 소소 라오에 다음에 봤더래 고알립테 티에도 두고라. 기신 미달레 동해레네 다음에 송스다. 미다바 예바데 동해와 삼르코 두고래. 동해와 되게네 다음에 봐. 라오에 다음에 봐. 풍부가가 동해와 유레 최신시나 디나리아 텔레테네 딱베타 딱바 라오치 용해요 말아. tension reparajuwa kudan kyal tene kechi kin juro chenge pumbunga la tension drill ne chawa chenge shimato rawa chi tele losu chi yong mardo o tende sam tangure to ya chichi sana.
So if we can contemplate in this way, the sort of fact that all things are impermanent and they are of a suffering nature, again, that we take up these contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and the afflictions. So in this way, by contemplating this sort of impermanent nature, we can come to understand that kind of suffering nature. And then we can understand, if we have a good understanding of that there can't be some kind of a permanent autonomous self, a unitary, permanent, autonomous self. That's something that's not possible. So this leads into an understanding of the third sort of factor of the First Noble Truth, that of selflessness. So this level of selflessness, by seeing that all phenomena are impermanent, we can recognize them as being suffering, and recognizing those, we can see that there is no such sort of permanent, autonomous, singular self. Rather, there's only something that is dependently originated. The only sort of self that we can speak about is something that is merely designated dependently on the basis of these ever-changing 5 aggregates. So in this way, one sort of sequentially comes to an understanding of the various aspects of the 4 noble truths, in particular here, the noble truth of suffering, by recognizing all phenomena as being impermanent and therefore in the nature of suffering, and therefore selfless in the sense of lacking that kind of permanent, autonomous, singular self.
Khi mà chúng ta hiểu được cái vô thường khổ thì chúng ta sẽ hiểu được cái tư tưởng của vô ngã.
Oh yeah. Well, that and that you know what is samlatan ra. Nghe xong cái tung samlatan này tele than được cái này tao samlatan được lo chema mà bị chi rồi ra. Và ngồi này thao chema to tham bên du samsar. Cáiว่าchema là đã mi ko wa chema do na de nhang cái du samje này be soa pa ya da mi cái pa ya da cáiว่าtruel be shuk chen bu che cho rồi ra. Này cáiว่าthông mà me bana sa se be le to zo le ko yosem je shak ba che cha che cho ba pro la so ba cáiว่าsa. Di chi le ne so zo sem le jo che. Chiga la mo ina ti samlo de shuk chen bu le gi ra. Này ten ro la da mi le ba do nghe son me ki chu cha ra. So teng to ri cha ra. O ti le be ko ra. Rồi thì chỉ dùng được rồi.
So, if we have a good idea of the suffering of the lower realms, and then we can give rise to a genuine wish to avoid that, and therefore strive for gaining a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future. And this is really what compels us to make an effort at virtuous actions, the sort of causes that will lead to that, as well as engaging in purification, recognizing that since beginningless time, we have engaged in many non virtuous actions, and therefore we should purify through the four opponent powers and engage in positive actions like offerings and prostrations and so forth. And it is in this way that by making effort at those, we can, at the time of death, face that with confidence, have the kind of confidence that we will definitely be born in such a good rebirth. So this is the kind of result of genuinely contemplating the suffering of those lower realms. That's what makes us really create the causes to avoid such a fate.
thì sẽ rất là nguy hiểm.
Tarba tenye ki lo nge song ki tong ele tarbe lo chi shin su de chema mai ba kom de nga nga shu ki ka de ina ko ya nga shu ki ya ki ya shi ora ngara zu to si chi de ma de chon nam sa khon do se je chema mai ba sa ngura khon do sa gu yo sam ka le kya gu me do to chi ma de na ha sam nam sa khon do sa gu da che ko me do pa ka le kya gu me do ha tin na shi nge song ki tong ele tan de 사담이 고가 탐되고 로체마 마이 방anga 슈기 계산하니 개발을 저야 되나 생각가 슈기 연구하러 오 임버체 전에 도된 님이 상로 마베나 마르카세 디스와 카세 도된 님이 상로 마베나 타바트니 지심이 계시데서 군중 코에 주는 마삼 나세 코에 싸워 주지 메시베 다들 간데스 연구하래 Niason le tonge tende ne tezo kande songore kyu kare tezo kun jungsa ge gyot kare kun jung temba ste kyu de le songora sanje che son de ne tonge pabe temba o se ngara do ton de ne le lonjo so so le so ba kanga se tonge ge shitin shin ge che da se shita shin ja che yo ma re songora de ne tonge pabe da de ne kun jung pabe da an de zo gyu kare se na kun jung pabe temba kunju de nyamo da nyamo go ga sa be le de ba le da nyamo ni le kunju de ba se do nyamo se na dang ji nga o sa be dang ji ane nga ge cha do de sim xian jiao le cha ba ran jiao le cha ba xian jiao le dang wa le so ba o chi chi nyamo do wa da nga ju a gu do nyamo mang cha de ha gu ya da dang ji shi de ngo ro ya bo chu ne me ne me shi ma do kong do da nga ge da cha do da rangchol le chakwa shenchol le kondo saya da tezu kanga de nga zungu sumdi gyur de ora haku da tezu kanga kwa kochi gyuri de ora di chakdang wangi migiwe le sa so na ane nge so le kechi gyuri de ora chakdang wangi kewe le saya yor da kondo wangi de kewe le saya yor ma de chakwe wangi kewe le saya yor wa di sa so na te tenrul hada mil o nga yabu chene ma do nga kyuwa chima tili kene kale du samsa na so so shencha yung ora anga sabso chegudo samla chakbe wangi re de ine digba pang kewa tukbe ora ke lhata mili kigi ore sakche ji le sudo nyomo wangi sakbe le kewa ine ko sakche ji le koye gyuli du ora nyomo mewe che ane le kewa saata saasuna ane tarwa da tamje kembo tobe kyu se jen du ora ya ale tichune mangda jiru.
So here in this verse again, it says, if you make no effort to ponder the faults of true suffering, a genuine wish for liberation will not arise. So here, this kind of genuine wish for liberation is sort of naturally occurring. The kind of you've contemplated to the point where it's always sort of there, in the same way that it's like uncontrived or unfabricated. Like say when someone provokes us and we get angry, we don't have to make any effort to get angry. That naturally comes up. We don't have to work at it. We don't have to think about it. We just get angry. If one has contemplated the faults of the truth of suffering to such a point, then naturally one will make an effort at virtue. That's the kind of result that will come from this kind of naturally having contemplated the sufferings of the lower realms. And then the suffering, and once one contemplates the sufferings of samsara, then there's a wish to be free from that altogether. So here, going into this next part of the verse, it says, if you do not contemplate how the origin of suffering leads to samsara, you will not know how to eliminate the root of samsara. So we have to then look at, well, what causes rebirth within samsara? These aggregates and so forth, we have been told, are the truth of suffering, and therefore we shouldn't be so attached to them. We shouldn't have such craving. But as far as how they arise, this is identified in the truth of the origin of suffering as karma and the afflictions. The afflictions primarily are grasping at a self, and then the kind of grasping at the side of mine and aversion toward other, the sort of competitiveness and jealousy and pride and anger and so forth. Afflictions are relatively easy for us to identify, other than the sort of grasping at a self. We can see the sorts of minds within that we have that are afflictive minds. And so here, while those actions which are harmful, which are non-virtuous, will lead to rebirths in the lower realms, virtues that are contaminated, we can engage in virtue out of attachment to, say, gaining a rebirth as a human or a god. That's still contaminated karma because it leads to rebirth within samsara. So here, if we don't contemplate what it is that leads to rebirth within samsara, then we can't eliminate that kind of root. So here, this involves contemplating the causality involved in not just taking rebirth in the lower realms, but also within all of samsara. Any sort of contaminated karma will lead to rebirth, continued cycling within samsara.
Do cái tham vọng những cái cảnh giới cao, cho nên là chúng ta sẽ tích lũy tạo những cái điều thiện, cho nên coi là cái nguyên nhân để chúng ta sinh vào cõi trời và cõi người. Nên nó là những cái nghiệp hữu lậu là do cái phiền não, cái tâm tiêu cực đó chúng ta tích lũy những cái nghiệp là những cái nghiệp lành, là nó sẽ dẫn cho chúng ta tái sinh trong cái sinh tử luân hồi. Còn cái tâm sân hận thì nó chẳng có một ưu điểm nào cả, cho nên tâm sân hận nó sẽ tạo những cái nguyên nhân dẫn vào sinh vào những cõi giới thấp.
Nói đã tuần đầu quân chúng khối chúng rìm sĩ đó, cảnh trên chúng tôi sĩ đó, khoa chúng rìm xe về nó ngã chúng tên đi hàng là chúng như xe về wa, thome mari qua sẽ ngã samsung rawa chụp ảnh chụp đi cháu đi rồi, khối cháu sẽ đó, nhưng mà càng cái用sao khối cháu đi thì này用qua đó, ngã sĩ đó rawa chỉ samlu tan đi, nên ngài sẽ thế đó, nên ngài theo ngài đồng nghĩa sẽ số số cho ta sinh cho ta càng cái thì này用đó, thằng bông ngã sĩ ta là sinh cho chính số đó. Ini taagi diyi si shenjaki, ini teli teni chakdaan rangcho shencho de kanga yunggara. Kiyindi, thomi marikpa, nga samsa nga zingi kunela. Ini ngiban dujigi lesa, nga kange si tunge mayungu, dewa togu sam, kange mengi nga tunda lega che, dewa togu tunda lega chigirwa, semgi samlu tangire, ini luigi pakyu suju chigire, kane keje shegire, o didi lesa degi wara. 소수 강에서다 대화 토에 던달래니 내가 지구하라 그들이나 삼을 당겨라 간다게 시기하래 버주 수주시 내가 지구하다 어디를 내서 그래 이번 두치기 내서 그래 도매 말이 뵙고 내가 안간지체 대왕게 달을 차바체 대왕게 내랑게 대화 주지다 동해세지 뒤던달이야 sem게 삼루다 간에 깨지시 가리 잡고서 가리 잡 롱된 거서 롱된 차도 지고서 차도 진 레슨 지고서 레슨 지고라. 저도 레사고라. 레사스도 가서 자와 가르치는 레사고라. 개회래 미개회래 롱마등 레스. 다 그로 개와다 미개와 가야 멤버체. 로와 다 잠잠 두개 세로다. 잡사다가 두개 세로 진대시네 롱마등 레래. 띠빠에 말에 개와게 말와. 팬이게 되고 말다. 어째지데 이번 두지기 레사스도 아니 레데 남산 데부직 마르와 탄다 미게 레사이나 남사 다케 미게 레사스스 데부 미에게 오마도 sem기텐도 파샤샤 네버딩 아데거레 매버차요 마르고 sem기 삼르탄도 sem기텐도 네버샤거라 숨번 남시스기도 하텔라 남시기텐도 개와다 미게 레사 파샤샤기도 숨번 남시스 다전에 제마 치가라 몰이야 아니 tel야 개바세바 구벌렘바스티야 사벨이야 추다 류겨나 신체자 네바 조금 민초거라 개바세바스데 치글라몰이야 세바를 치다 망치할 텐데 거라 Geba seba kuba lembase. Minter seba se na karsura. Meba macha na samsa meba chaya samle yungutoa. Thabkhe kinji kusigira. Thala mere dugusa meba de rigyo maroko. Sogu lega macha sem chama dugyora. Ene thala meba re dugu samche. Geba seba se. Minter seba. Tanda te choga sam saya yona tuya yona. Jaya yona sam tezukanga yona sam geware. Minter seba. Tanda te da. Mandrewa che te chuna sa shukchimbu kyagora. Suine kyagora. Naza de chana sangi maneshi chana sam samlu shukchimbu kogora. Nangmi de nyamdo te chuna sam samlu kogora. Seba sekdo atali geba seba. Kuwa lemba si du zata rawari che medu chik. Toya ye choga saya ye choga. Toya ye choga sapsari che. Lemba si chi ye na sam seba shukchimbu kyagora. Geba seba kuwa lemba sekdo. Ani tine kyawa lanto ne kyawa sambu. Le sa shangi kyawa de le soyo tab tusuna. Shigalamu kewe samlu shukchayari chonsuna ni kewe le le soyo tab kiwara. Shigalamu semba miki kondru suru sa tendu chena ni yaga chiburwa. Mikuwe le soyo tab yaga rigwara. Ni nga son le sa kiwara. Odi kunchun kowe jugrim sidu tira. Ta nga son ke yadruchi ne tome marube kuna la miki chu shenla sewe miki chu le sa. Tele tena ni shigalamu kewa seba kuwa lemba soyo tab. Ni nyawa yada tandru kiwara. Di pang yu na, migewa shenla tsawa pang be kewa chu lera chi saa yu na, tele yang keba seba kuba lemba suyo tamne tenru hlada meli kendu wara. Kunchung kowe jungrim stira, ngesong li kene ngesong kewe ju kunchung katire, ki tangbu kari yungure, nipa kari yungure, ini kandis kigire es, ti shen wara. Kowa kore ina hlada meli keba tu tangbu di kare, nipa lea saa re, ini tine seba lemba, tine tili kigire es. O ti tanda gyudan debun drawate. Ngesong li kaya nanda, tenru hlada mili kaya nanda ti kundu jungwe gyudi rinpa kante siresa. Kunjung kore jungnim sikdwa. Kowa la kordan kulu, kowe tidu yongdang yonglu ti sikora. Gyundegi drawate yabuji hako kora. Kunjung kowe jungnim masamna, ti samlu tangde she masuna, ni kowe tsawa chuzu meshibesa. Tanga ngesong la majiwe basi. Maji na samna ngesong la mejiwe Thabkhe chekuwe hako marda. Koala maji na samna koala mejiwe Thabkhe bahaku maro. Kowe tsawa de meba suyo na ni jebu de meba sogura. O ti juti le te tangbu juti re se tenen di yungu doa sam yabu chaha kwa suna. O ta ti jebu de meba tondal juti meba sogwe. Di meba sogwe samche. Maya ke chudi shingi wara. Kunjung kowe juri ma samna. Kowe tsawa chuzu me shibesa. Kowe tsawa. Ngesongi tsawa ti meba soya ti haku ma re songdo ya ti chila.
So here then, if you do not contemplate how the origin of suffering leads to samsara, you will not know how to eliminate the root of samsara. So here, one needs to understand the sort of stages, the process of samsara, which have been explained by the Buddha in the 12 links of dependent origination, beginning with that kind of fundamental ignorance, this fundamental thought of I, or grasping at an I, a self, and that then leads to the sense of mine, on my side, having attachment toward that and aversion toward other. As we see in the verse by Chandrakirti, where he says, first thinking I and then mine. He's describing this kind of process by which we then create various karmas. So motivated by that thought of I and wanting to then get good things for oneself, achieve happiness and avoid suffering, one makes effort then. And so those sorts of actions are then karmic formations, the second link in these 12 links of dependent origination. So we have a particular sort of motivating thought, and then we engage in various actions with our body, speech with our words, and so forth, making all these efforts in order to remove our suffering and get our happiness and so forth. So out of a kind of attachment to I and mine and wanting to get good things for ourselves, we are willing sometimes to engage in things like fighting with others or getting angry or having a sort of sense of competitiveness. Whatever it is that we do, we are creating these various karmas. And so sometimes we are doing virtues or non-virtues. Other times they are things that we call like immovable, or those that are sort of neutral karmas. Like, for example, when we're walking around or going to the bathroom or something like that. But all of the actions that we create, they're not immediately going to bring about results, but rather they lay down sort of imprints, a propensity or an ability that remains on our consciousness. So the third in the link of the 12 links of dependent origination is that of consciousness. And so it is then at the time of death, when we go through up to the sort of a later parts of the 12 links, we get into the link of craving and then grasping, which sort of act to foster the kind of karmic imprints that have been laid down on that consciousness and propel us into a new existence, a new birth, and so forth. And so there are those, again, who maybe they think during the time of their life that when they die, they're going to become totally non-existent. But there's still a craving to exist, to still have some sort of being or still remain. And so that kind of, at the time of death, one can have this sort of attitude of craving and grasping. The distinction between these is like craving is sort of wanting something, and grasping is when it's like right there, when you can sort of take hold of it. And so these are the kind of causes. It's like we have planted that seed, we have laid down that imprint on our consciousness, and then that seed is ripened, sort of fostered by that craving and grasping, leading into a ripening result in a future rebirth. So here again, the sort of mind that we have at the time of death is considered extremely important, because that can be like a seed that is potentially the seed that will ripen into a future rebirth. So having a sort of non-virtuous mind at the time of death, being angry or having grasping attachment towards something, is considered to be very dangerous, because that can then lead to a particular rebirth, a birth in the lower realms, and so forth. So again, in this sort of process, we're not going through all of the various links, but the fundamental ignorance, this grasping at a self, this grasping at an I, then causes us to engage in karmic formations, which lay down imprints on our consciousness, which then are sort of ripened, brought to fruition through the links, the 8th link of craving, and then the 9th of grasping. And this is then how it comes about that we continue to take rebirth. So here, contemplating the origin of suffering, or how the origin of suffering leads to samsara, really means examining cause and effect, seeing how it is that certain causes will lead to, say, a rebirth in the lower realms, or certain causes will lead to continued rebirth within samsara. And it is based upon that kind of understanding of causality that we're then able to recognize, well, what is the root cause of, if it's the lower realms and we see it's non-virtue harming others, we can get rid of that in order to ensure a good rebirth. Or if we're thinking about all of samsara, what is it, that fundamental root of samsara? And by extricating that, by getting rid of that, we're then able to eliminate the result of samsara. So here, contemplating the origin of suffering really means thinking in detail about causality, cause and effect, and the process by which samsara occurs.
Nhân thứ nhất, nhân thứ hai, nhân thứ ba, thứ tư như thế nào để cái tiến trình chúng ta đi vào trong sinh tử luân hồi. Cho nên nếu như cái việc thiện mà nó được kích hoạt thì chúng ta sinh vào cõi lành, cõi trời, cõi người. Cho nên đó là một cái sự liên quan chặt chẽ giữa nhân với quả. Tại vì cái hành động mình đã tạo do vô minh, chúng ta đã tạo tác hành động và nó huân tập trong tâm thức. Rồi sau đó thì với ái thổ hữu nó được kích hoạt và chúng ta sẽ đi tái sinh. Cho nên nói nếu không tư duy được cái tiến trình chúng ta đi vào cái sinh tử luân hồi, tiến trình nào nó dẫn chúng mà cái gọi là những tập nhân là cái nguyên nhân khổ đau, những cái nó dẫn dắt chúng ta vào sinh tử luân hồi, vào cõi lành hay cõi ác, thì chúng ta sẽ không biết cách nào để chặt đứt cái gốc của sinh tử luân hồi. Nếu chúng ta không biết tiến trình nào đi vào sinh tử luân hồi thì chúng ta mờ mịt, Nó không có biết phương pháp nào để chấm dứt những cái tiến trình dẫn sinh vào những cái cõi giới thấp, địa ngục, ngạ quỷ, súc sinh. Cho nên chúng ta không biết cái gốc rễ của luân hồi nằm ở chỗ nào, cũng không biết cái gốc rễ nào nó dẫn tới cái cảnh giới ác đạo. Thì chúng ta không biết cái nguyên nhân của nó, thì cái việc từ bỏ những cái nguyên nhân để sinh ra ác đạo chúng ta cũng không biết luôn. Cho nên nói rằng nếu không tư duy những tiến trình vào cái sinh tử luân hồi, những cái nguyên nhân của khổ đau, những tập nhân trong tứ thanh đế đó, thì sẽ không biết cách để chặt đứt cái gốc của luân hồi.
Đó xí lên nghiên cứu cho xe tên bà đó, tên đưa xăm lúc tàn này, xí bà khoa là đó, nghe xong là kia là tên đưa tung ngay ở đây xăm xem là cho ai kia bà xe đó, khoa là kia là thông mà mình là khoa kia để mà ông bà là kia chỉ theo con na, xem bà cho bà đây xăm xe đó, tên đưa qua sao, xí lên nghiên cứu xí là xí bà khoa là sao đó, khoa là nghe xong cái khoa là kia là tên đưa tung ngay đó. Olhada mele soba ina tule koa kena tunga tinde du sam sile nginju se ngeba jone koa le kena yabu me du sam shenji chaba ina tetso lo batal nginju se tanda ngazu susu ne da lu da longju le soba pa simpa cha de yora tadi o de yabu re me da shita shenja che ke re me do sa lo chu lo yong batal nginju se gra ngeba to jonga se nginju se sile nginju choshe tenpa tasa, koa kyo samla tane koa le kyona ke, te yabu me doa sam, tele tarwa shebu doa sam, ta tele nge songi tunga le tarwa shedo, shen le tsawa pa chini ki penpa chuk rwa, koa tunga le tarwa shedo, taadun zimba ta chakdaan la soba, nyamo chado ngaje la soba, nyamo tuzo paane, ene tarwa toba shebu do sam, te ha koa shene, ene te kyuso le begu re sungora. Silengi ju kyoshe tenpa tang koa kange chingpa koa la chingji di kare tanda nga zu mii koa la koa terwa mii sokpo len terwa mii sokpo tang susu nyamdo te de wara ne sokpo de la neba tang chi na cha chu ne susu nyamdo nyonggo ya redo sa chingpa sikara sakche nyinglen ji pungpo li chingpa re taa de ten nyamdo sha ne nga zu ching siru kawanda jil chi tang pa thakwe yabu tamna chingpa sikadwa 어디 레다 녀무 배워가 단다 가지고 밀리게 미 코알 파칭니 미 소보를 때문에 셈다 소화던 두시제 더 동해를 가르냐고네 티냥은 지대기도 때 미를 찍버라 던전도 전에 던전 소보를 지라지 텔 가르티 두르시냐제 코테하고 서샤도 모델을 찍버서라 코라 강게 찍버시 바시제세 대하고 하잖아요 아니 칭지 교도소 빠네 랑도라 배고래 송고라 년중에 냠리 때다르체 타도 케게 티신 캔슬 제송가 바랑게 텐데 냠리 체바에 네 케라조 텐데 냠리 체고래 송고도 텐데 냠리 체고 삼네 림빙원도 라미 공바다 타르바다 탐제 쳔베 공바 치네게 토버차 대체도네 최년기 삼고로 세담에 셈버 쇼스죠 텐데
So continuing this verse, it says, hence, it is essential to cultivate renunciation of samsara and recognize what binds you in samsara. So here we need to have that sense of renunciation, of being sort of disillusioned with samsara, wanting to get out of this kind of cyclic existence. So if we recognize that these things that we experience are still in the nature of suffering, even if we are, say, born as a human or born as a god, we still have to experience suffering, the sufferings of samsara. And so if we really think about their nature, then we will give rise to this kind of definite want to get out of that. And that's the kind of renunciation that we need. If we want to think about sort of getting out of the lower realms, avoiding that kind of fate, then we need to abandon that sort of thing that is harmful to others, abandon any kind of actions that are harmful to others, and in turn make efforts at those things which are beneficial to others. Now, in order to, when we look at what binds us within samsara, or what it it is that keeps us within samsara, we see that it is really the afflictions, the karma and the afflictions that cause us to continually take rebirth. And if we recognize that, then we can make an effort to get rid of those causes, to cut that off. So here, where it says, and recognize what binds you in samsara, like when we think about right now, we are human and we are sort of stuck in this human body with this particular basis for experiencing suffering. Like the way that when you bind something, like tie it really tightly to something else, it's stuck with that. It's like they're bound together. So too, it is with whatever sort of body a being takes up, whether it's an animal or a human, that's the kind of basis upon which they have to experience their various types of suffering. So when we recognize that this is really the situation that we are in, we see what are the causes that bind us within samsara, then we will make an effort to get out of that kind of situation. We will make an effort at those things that we should adopt and avoid those things that we should abandon. So Lama Tsongkhapa ends this verse by saying, I, a yogi, practiced in this way. You who seek liberation should do likewise. So here he's encouraging us to, again, sort of follow his example. This is the way that he, as a yogi, as a practitioner, began with the sort of renunciation toward the lower realms, then this renunciation toward samsara, and finally wish to achieve the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So likewise, in stages, we should give rise to a proper kind of motivation for listening to the teachings, thinking that we are doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings, in order to become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So in that way, please set a good motivation for listening to the teachings.
Cho nên người nào muốn giải thoát thì nên thực hành theo. Cho nên với cái động cơ chúng ta dần dần muốn sinh vào cái cõi trời, cõi người, vào cõi lành, nên chúng ta sẽ biết làm thế nào để bỏ ác làm lành, làm thế nào để làm những gì cần nên làm và từ bỏ những gì cần phải từ bỏ. Cho nên chúng ta phát khởi cái động cơ vì để hiểu được điều đó, để thoát ly cái cõi luân hồi. Cho nên chúng ta lắng nghe cái bài pháp ngày hôm nay.
Ôi, thằng nào đi mà xem chẳng bao cái ràng rì sinh cái khai lẽ xong à, chi sẽ chi chuẩn bị là so ba ở tổ chức cái ràng sẽ xem sẽ vật chịu đó sẽ, ở trên này sẽ ba kêu được sao, mình sẽ ba cái cái số nào số sẽ chi cái sẽ ba mình sẽ đi cái mình sẽ Quran sẽ chi cái ràng rì sẽ mình sẽ ràng rì cái sẽ ba chính nhâm đôi cái sẽ rồi ba. Ở thì bé thì là này ràng rì sẽ ba kêu được ràng sẽ về yu số ra chế rồi cho là so ba sẽ về sẽ ba chỉ đó yu trên Quran sẽ về sẽ ba chính nhâm đôi cái yu trên sang cái sẽ ba để ràng rì sẽ yu số ra là so ba sang cái sẽ ba để sang rì cái sẽ ba sẽ ra số gì mình sẽ ra trên số gì mình sẽ đi số thông qua ra thì sang rì cái sẽ ba sẽ ra số gì mình sẽ ràng sẽ về sẽ ra đó là ràng rì sẽ ra sang rì ràng rì cái sẽ ba sẽ khả năng là cho ba chỉ được khả chi là cho ba ở thế sự rồi thì bé thì là chuẩn bị ở là so ba ở chỗ chỗ chi yu tên thì mình bảo mẹ xong yu thì chú thua chỉ rồi đó nhưng mà mình ở Quran sẽ vào chỉ đó là vậy đó ở thì bé thì phải cao rồi đó ở mà bảo vậy đó bé thì mình đối sẽ mà mình ở thì mà mình sẽ vào chỉ cũng mà đấy sẽ mà mình ở Quran cái chi yu thì chú sẽ vào chỉ rồi mà mình Quran sẽ vào chỉ cũng mà đấy chỉ có yêu mà Quran tăng bún này cái điều sẽ vào đấy rồi anh thì sẽ vào chỉ cái yêu mà đấy sẽ ở thế sự rồi đó chỉ để mà mình rang cái người yang đã sẽ vào chỉ xin ha sẽ vào rang sẽ vào cha đó sẽ vào cha nhiều rồi thế nào mà mình ở chỗ chỗ cái sẽ vào cha chỉ đó rang sẽ vào cha chỉ nhiều đó sẽ bé su lao rồi sẽ na sẽ ra nên mà mình sẽ vào cha mình đấy sẽ mà mình yu sanh đó sẽ vào chỉ rồi mà mình Quran sẽ vào chỉ cũng mà đấy sẽ cái nào bé thì mình đối xử rồi mà mình sẽ vào cha mình đấy sẽ mà mình sẽ vào cha mà đấy sẽ vào chỉ cũng mà đấy sẽ rồi cái gì thì mà mình sẽ vào chỉ na mình bắt chước rồi mình bắt cái yu chước Quran chước rồi mình bắt chước rồi na này member trip dengue so to meton ashendo member de meton ko de member de tongo do asegora naguna chine mishi member ton de yora sa do rang rang se gi yona member de trip je so da rang rang trip ko de se tena member shu be nal chine su meton ashendo member ya meton de yung de se o ti shegdo kanchir mengi Tiba mes, hotel lapsen ding mado, digreta hotel lomocha.
So here, picking up in the text, we are at this at beginning with verse 18, talking about the mind-only school who asserts a kind of reflexive awareness, a kind of awareness. They liken it to being like something like a lamp that illuminates the external world, but illuminates itself as well, they would say. So too, consciousness has this kind of aspect, this part that is illuminating external objects, as well as sort of illuminating itself. So there is that kind of aspect or sort of other knower, other awareness that takes on an external object. Like in the case of a visual consciousness apprehending form, that takes form as its object. But then there is the reflexive awareness or self-cognizing consciousness, which is only inward facing, which only perceives consciousness, only perceives itself. So therefore takes as its object a visual, like in the case of a visual consciousness apprehending form, it takes that visual consciousness apprehending form as its object. So here the middle way school replies, so here in verse 18 it reads, you may reply, referring to the mind-only school, it is like a lamp illuminating itself. While the centrists or the Madhyamakas reply, a lamp does not illuminate itself, since darkness does not conceal itself. So here the Madhyamakas say this is not a valid example. When a lamp illuminates things, we don't talk about it illuminating itself. That's sort of like part of the nature of the lamp is being illuminating. And it only really lights up the external world. If it followed that a lamp illuminated itself, then darkness would have to obscure itself in the way that darkness obscures our ability to see other forms. If darkness obscured itself, it would make it non-observable. So we wouldn't be able to see that darkness, which doesn't make any sort of sense. So when it comes to things like a lamp, it illuminates external objects. We can agree on that, but it doesn't illuminate itself. That doesn't make sense to say. If so, we would have to say then that darkness too obscures itself, meaning that we could not perceive darkness, which is not true. So here, the example that the mind-only school is trying to put forth for the existence of such a reflexive awareness, the Madhyamakas say that's not a valid example because a lamp doesn't illuminate itself.
Binduria se ya kurang ngombo chiordo oti ngombo de shala to ne mara kurang rangshe ge ngombo tabudo ase oti na she yu tongwa de shala to ne tongyo res mishi de sheba rang rang sa wa de shanda je tongyo mares yu de sheba shanda je tongyo ra mishi tongyo ra su de china sunji mishi de sheba shanda je tonggo mara kurang rang sa ve cha rari de tongres Pechagora, oti pedendric dosugara, Caresala, Bindure ngombote, ngombo yimbate, Kudan Kengi Cheba Maiba, Rangshingi to Ngombo Chabachi Made Sigora, oti tiran pedendric medos sigurta wadima, Didedo. Shelshi ngombo ngonyi lase, Shego Cabo de Woli Ashide, Ngombo Chunate, Ngombo Tomate Sigura, Sheshi ngombo ngonyi la, ane. Shanla toba yuma yesa o shego tozo shego kabute wogi shigombo chile tone kongombo chade togu rese bindure ngombo la soba tezo shile shajile tone shego mara kora shanla toba yoba mare kora ngombo rangshi ngombo rese gora o tena shesora teshe kangshi shanla ne toda tome paya thonsa o te yu de sheba shenji la tön tongyo re 유제 쉐바 코란데 쉐바 셴다제 통고 말에 코란게 코란 세베 차쇼르 티통그레 세고라 니카레 기시 가시 샬라네 또다 때문에 빠야 통세 원이 밀라 원보르테 다게 당이 제바 메세 지부데 원보 레원보데 원보르주와 샬라 떠바다 빈두레 원보데 샬라 떠바 메바 당 랑게 당이 원보 제바 아티 마데세 테 주진레 떠그레세 시거도 야 티시로는 리레
So then the mind-only school tries to use another example, which is then refuted here by the centrists in the next verse, where it says, again, this is putting forth the sort of proposition of the mind-only school. They say, a blue thing does not require another blue thing for its blueness, as does a clear crystal. So the mind is seen sometimes to depend on another, sometimes not. So here, they are trying to assert that, like, when you have, say, a clear crystal and you put that on something blue, then that crystal will appear blue because of the cause of having some blue object underneath it. But when you take something like that is naturally blue, like lapis lazuli, that doesn't depend upon anything else for it to be blue. It's just sort of blue in and of itself. And so here, the response that the centrists or the Madhyamakas give is that there is, even in the case of something like lapis lazuli, there's nothing that is blue in and of itself. Rather, that lapis lazuli is dependent upon causes and conditions to have its blueness. So you can't say that this is a valid example of the fact that sometimes mind is taking an external object and sometimes mind is merely observing itself without having to depend upon anything else. According to the Madhyamakas, that's really not a valid kind of example. So here they give the response in the first half of verse 20, where it says, such blueness of a blue thing is not regarded as the cause of its own blueness, as in the case of non-blueness of a crystal where there is causation. So here they're saying that this example of like a crystal where you can put it on something and it'll take up the color of that, and then there are other things where they're that color in and of themselves. This really is not a good example of this, because something is not just blue in and of itself.
어디 말다 듣노샤 열래샤 이슈작지 아 그래서 진짜 사소 진짜 다들 다들은 이바들아 다야 가봐세더라 다라리 예세 단다가 단다 빼도서 가서 다라리 라게라 셰바 라게라 니나 노베스 지르베 셰바 신념도 예세한테 가고라 단다도 가고라 이번 대가 반에서 마음에 세월 제도시 셰베 셰데 죄제나서 와 마음에데 생기 세월 지그레서 가서라 마음에 세월 제도시 셰베 셰데 죄제나서 로네 세와 니 예시 로네 세와 니 예시 이거래 셰베 셰네 되게 죄세 마음에 네 랑게랑 세월 매체가 네 와 셰베 바 세월 지그레서 말 마음에 랑게랑 세월 매체가 서와 마음에 세와 니도 마음에 랑게랑 세와 지금 말해서 딸 랍사와 마음에 랑게랑 세고 말해서라 셴세와 지금 마토시 마음에 랑게랑 세와 매체가 네 매체가 마음에 세와 니도 마음에 고란 세체래 이내 마음에 고란 그 고란 세고 말해서 뭐 셰베 셰데 셰 대달 쳬바체 나세 뒤딸에 셰사서 Sheba rangi rang sewa mahila se. Sheba de rangi rang sewa mare se. Tedana lone sewa ni yeno sheba ze shen Geshe na. Sheba ze shen gi sheba ina ni tomi re. Di shenge sheba shen dachi ya, di shenge sheba shen dachi. Miki sheba shenge di sheba shen dachi sharwa. Sheba shen dachi yu miki sheba shenge sheba tonga di ya shen dachi na. Tomi re du re se wara. 제 생기시는 되게도 지어버치데 미리소스 통미를 그래서 제 생기리나 통미도 주로 랑이라 미리 생기자 미리 나세 랑이라 저기 말에 생기자 리바 미리 나세 기지도다 그래서 오야 티스코나
So here then sorry, the last part of verse 20 reads again, what blue would make just blue itself by itself? Again, getting at the fact that this can't exist independent of various causes and conditions. So then this continues into verse 21, where it then is giving this sort of response by the centrist to this idea, again presented earlier. So this is refuting the meaning of what was posited by the mind-only school, and it reads, the statement that a lamp illuminates is made upon knowing this with awareness. So we're able to be aware of the fact that a lamp illuminates by being aware of that. So even if we concede that a lamp doesn't illuminate itself, it can be known as being the thing that illuminates due to a verifying cognition. So the statement that mind illuminates is made upon knowing this by what awareness? So it is another sort of substance of awareness by which we can look at a lamp and say that's the thing that illuminates. But the mind-only school is asserting this kind of reflexive awareness that knows in a non-dual kind of way, where there's no sort of subject and object that are distinct in any kind of way. So if that is the case, that there's not a substance like separate from mind that knows, that's able to verify that illuminating nature of mind, then how is it known? If you assert that there is another kind of consciousness that is a substantially different thing that verifies the existence of that illuminating consciousness, then that would become a problem of infinite regress. There would need to be a consciousness that knows and verifies that consciousness and knows and verifies that consciousness, and so on, without any kind of limit. So here again in verse 21, it reads, the statement that mind illuminates is made upon knowing this by what awareness? Because again, it's being made, the assertion is being made that reflexive awareness is something that is a completely non-dual, there's no subject and object there, but rather it knows itself. So this is the kind of criticism that is directed at the mind-only school's assertion by the Madhyamakas.
Biết như vậy thì cuối cùng cái này không biết, cái phải nhờ cái khác, cái nhờ cái khác, cuối cùng nó không biết cái nào để mà nhận biết cái tâm nó, để mà biết được cái tâm nó đang biết.
thế chỉ làm nó có mà thôi, đó bảo cái này thôi mà. Đấy, tao này dùng cái đó thì cả số đấy. 다 먹고 자잖아. 시간 거기다. 당가 주다가 쉬어야 돼. 응원도 하다 미 고반 톱제시도 네 소송기 동에 삼발을 써봐. 어쩌서 삼바. 거에 동에 삼발을 써봐. 어쩌서 이집에 삼니 마주나 삼 만들나야. 네 손에 깨지게 유대 미기와 주대로와 샬라 차와들의 삼. 샬라 차와디 통만 매번나 망부체어를 제조를 줘봐체. 샬라 차와디 빵고도 사 진흙 펜바 주고 삼사. 디 주디 죽도나 이거 이제 동해 삼내 아셈리 좋아케시 미지부 차비네 도다요 말와 코티 채널로라 타르바토웨체도 nga 삼사 딱바르시 소소 잔자마도 삼기맹게 티체나 야보레 메도아삼 ene nga zo konzuso nga je trado dressing tinde체데 야보레 메도아사 차당게 녀모도zo 바야레 도아 삼제 진이 빵바이나네 야고 타르바다 ngandongele tobe kule dura te dure ta de bishishana ta
So here, there's more that will come below regarding this point in the text, but just turning back to what we discussed at the beginning, again, even if we don't like thinking about the sort of sufferings of the lower realms and the sufferings of samsara and so forth, by contemplating them and by contemplating the sort of causes, that's how we really begin to make effort. We see, like, I will have to experience the sufferings of the lower realms if I engage in harming others. So however much I am able to, I'm going to abandon harming others. I'm going to work to benefit others. And recognizing that since beginningless time, I've accumulated all kinds of negativities. I'm going to make an effort at regretting those and resolving to purify and so forth. And then by recognizing the kinds of defects of our various afflictions and seeing how it is that the thought of I and sort of being attached to my side and all of those various afflictions lead us to continued rebirth in samsara, that's how we give rise to a wish to get free from that. Like, seeing the defects of that is how we really genuinely start to make an effort at the kind of causes that will lead us out of that. So again, these things are not contemplations that are to just make us depressed or unhappy, but they are for the purpose of really putting that effort into striving for liberation from those kinds of states. So by seeing the defects in that and by understanding the kind of causality involved, that's how we have the sort of efficacy, the power to be able to make an effort to get out of the state that we are in. So I would encourage us all to think about that on a regular basis.
Before we do the dedication, please pray for my friend's father, whose name he's in the Tibet. His name is Kasang. He's in the intensive care because of COVID. So he's very serious. Please pray for him to recover quickly. And then please pray for Mr. Kevin to sell his business successfully. Please pray for, and then pray for all the devotees, relatives and parents who passed away within last few months. May wherever they in the Parto or any realm, just may they find a good rebirth.
Điều đó là trước khi mình hồi hướng công đức mình xin cầu nguyện cho người phụ huynh phụ thân của đoàn của Geshe, người tên là Cao Sang đang bị mắc bệnh Covid, đang ở trong bệnh viện. Xin hồi hướng công đức cho anh Kevin để anh có thể bán được cái dịch vụ thương mại của anh được thành công. Và xin hồi hướng công đức cho những cái vị môn đạo và cho những cái phụ huynh là cha mẹ của những cái vị này vừa mới qua đời cách đây trong vòng 2 tháng vừa qua, và xin cầu nguyện cho họ những cái vong linh của họ đang ở trong tâm trung ấm hay là trong bất kỳ một cõi nào đó có được một cái tái sinh tốt lành. Thì
Yes, short one now.
Bây giờ mình cũng được là vai ngắn và
Bede Jose Medo Tram Rali Shinginde Kambade Sanje Shendo Mede Bevai Drogananda Shila Chevasho Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kanaya Tayame Devadi Nyudu Da Lama Sangye Drogyoni Droa Chigama Lewa Le Sala Kavasho Chanjo Zemjo Rinpoche Makevanam Jejuruchi Kewa Nyamba Mebaraya Kone Kondo Pewa Yasho.
Thank you, Katrina, for your English translation, and thank you, Geshe for your Vietnamese translation. Thank you, Geshe.
Yeah, do the Vietnamese dedication.
Nguyện đem công đức này hướng về khắp các phương cầu để cầu các chúng sinh đều trốn thành Phật đạo.
Okay, so tomorrow Pandita need the rest and Gishima also need the rest. Okay, so we may have no teaching tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, Thursday morning, we have a regular teaching on the commentary teaching on the Rice Seedling Sutra at morning 11 to 1, and then evening if Pandita feel good, then maybe evening one more time before Siko leave. Yeah, in the evening. If it's not confirmed, so it depend on the Pandita's health. That's one thing. And then the second, I would like to say personally, I would like to thank you for Siko and Katrina, both of them make available for us to translate this very, very precious teaching. And then of course this is the most difficult chapter in the Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. So I request or encourage all our devotees to read them again and again. And in the future also I will request both Katrina and especially Siko to make one more time available to translate this and finish. This is very difficult, so we may not miss this opportunity. So I personally request Siko and Katrina to consider this special, so in whenever they're available. Thank you very much.
Tôi chưa nói rằng là ngày mai thì chúng ta cần phải dưỡng sức, cho nên ngày mai mình sẽ không có lớp, không có học tối mai. Nhưng mà sáng hôm thứ năm thì ngài Bodhisattva vẫn tiếp tục giảng về cái kinh cây lúa, hạt lúa, cây lúa vào lúc 11 giờ tới 1 giờ, giống như thường lệ. Buổi tối thì có thể mình sẽ có lớp hoặc có thể là không, chưa có chắc, bởi vì tùy theo sức khỏe của
Record.